Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Mabuse, aka Mike Murphy, and we're coming to you this afternoon, a beautiful late fall afternoon from the Luminary Art Center in St. Louis, Missouri. So the first thing I want to do is thank the Luminary for loaning us their beautiful venue. You're watching the Electronium series by the HEARdring Cats Artist Collective. We're very grateful for their support, and I'm very grateful for their help and support in my own performances. And today's segment is about this pile right here that is collectively known as the Aurora. It's not a very imaginative name. I tried a bunch of other cleverer names for it, but every time I tried those, they just sounded gratuitously clever. And what the thing still sounded like in my mind was the Aurora. It's not a pretty device. Its job is to play the types of sounds that you're hearing in the soundtrack now. The sounds are very, the popular term is ambient. It's built around the concept of very slow changes and very sonorous. It can do harmonies. It's basically for quiet, open, pretty figures in music. A lot of my electroniums are capable of doing this kind of sound, but I decided around 2016 that I wanted a device that was devoted to these kinds of sounds. And so the design of this instrument was really made for a purpose. It does not do the kind of jagged, pointillistic figures. This is what it's made for, and this is what it does best. It's in some senses rather complex, but the idea is simple, and the center of the sound is this module right here, which I did not design or build. It is a synthesizer module called a patch chord, C-H-O-R-D versus chord, C-O-R-D, and it was made by Earthenvar. And I'm using the past tense there because sadly, Earthenvar no longer makes this amazing and beautiful oscillator. It's a digital oscillator. Now, there are probably people watching who know me, and their eyebrows probably went up. They probably said, "Oh my God, that a digital oscillator in one of Dr. Mabuse's electroniums, you know, that there's a problem there. Something's up." Well, something is definitely up, and that is that I realized that even though I normally eschew digital components in an audio signal chain, I for this purpose, I really needed to be able to tune various voices of the electronium precisely. And digital does intervals with great precision and much more reliably than an analog can. If there had been an analog alternative that would have produced triangle waves, for instance, with the same tuning precision that this device can, I would have used it, but this works extremely well. The resolution of the waves is very high resolution, and they are being processed further down the chain by analog processors. So that rounds out any possible bad digital mojo that might worry me when I decide to get philosophical about things. And as I mentioned, it does intervals with enormous precision. The overall scheme is that behind the panel, under the hood, the oscillator is sending 25 tones into the rest of the system. And essentially they get shepherded into two channels. One channel is essentially where the 25 tones are all being sent to a 25-channel mixer. So that if I wanted, I could bring up all 25 tones at one time, and the tones produced by the earthenvar patch cord are basically 2 octaves of an equal tempered scale. So, and if you notice, the outputs are arranged like a piano keyboard: C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G. So, and there's one octave, an octave above and an octave below. So there are 2 octaves, and they're always going all the time. And on the back of the instrument, you will see that that I implemented 25 sliders, so that I can bring up all 25 tones at one time if I want, or select whichever ones. But that creates a static chord, which is, and we're going to talk about the chord channel a little later, because I'm going to switch now to the other routing, and that is that the 25 tones are being sent to this matrix switch. And what this matrix switch is doing is it's selecting, by the vertical position of the switch, one of the tones from this selection here, and sending that tone through a VCA. So it's gating that tone on and off, but it's not gating it just on, off. As you can hear the little moving figures, it ramps up and it ramps down. So it goes wow. And this sequential ramping up and down is a function that analog synthesists are pretty familiar with, called quadrature. And that is that a quadrature generator is a device that produces a triangular shape, a voltage that rises and falls, and the quadrature happens because when the first triangle reaches its peak, the next triangle of 4 begins an ascent as the other one is climbing down. And so on and so forth 4 times. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 in a sequence. You can hear in the little melodic figure that goes up and down at various rates of speed. Those are the quadrature. It's an arpeggiator. In musical terms, it's selecting notes of a chord and then gating them on and off. And the notes that are selected by these sliders. There are 2 separate independent quadrature generators arpeggiating the selected notes. So there is a what I call a red, an orange, a yellow, and a green, and a blue, and then another red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. So that's how I select the notes that will be processed by the arpeggiator. The blue channels are special. So the red, orange, yellow, and green are on the quadrature generator. The blue, which are actually the notes that are being selected, are also indicated in this section by the LEDs that light up. And you'll see that the blues are on and fade on and off. They're independent. They are on LFOs that rise and fall, independent of one another and independent of the quadrature generator. The point here is that the quadrature is very nice sounding, but it will get very boring very fast if it's always in a sequence. And so I built this device to ensure that things would never settle into a steady state, that they would always be changing, but at different rates, and rates that would not synchronize. And the overall effect is of arpeggios and chords that fade in and out, but never in a fully predictable way. Because I'm already imposing an enormous amount of predictability just using the equal tempered scale with those chromatic intervals that are fixed. So I wanted to make sure that they were always being changed. Now, going back to the oscillator at the heart of the system, the beauty of the oscillator is that say that this is C on the piano keyboard, and the root tone that all of these intervals are derived from is completely analog, is controlled by an analog voltage. So the entire tonal structure of the output is essentially being derived from one single frequency, and you can change that frequency. So I built a ribbon controller that changes the frequency, and so I'm going to start low on the ribbon. the chord is starting from a higher note, but all the intervals have remained the same. Now, this alone really expands the harmonic vocabulary range of this device, because as you'll see later on in the presentation, there are fixed filters that this is running through which will react to high frequencies different than from low. And this also means that by ear, I can tune this chord to anything along its range, from very high to very low. And it works plenty fast. I can do vibrato of the entire thing. I can just... So it can almost be played like a stringed instrument. Now, I'm going to show you a block diagram of the signal flow in this system before we explore the chord channel in detail. I've talked about how the arpeggiator works, now we're gonna, but before we talk about the chords, I want to give you all an overview of how the signal flows. This is a block diagram of the Aurora, Aurora's signal flow. Now, what I just talked about is the arpeggio panel, which is this path down here. And we're going to talk about the chord path. This box represents the patch chord, the earthenvar patch chord oscillator. And basically what happens is that 25 notes are coming out of it at all times. They go, and in the diagram, they go down to that matrix switch where I select them for routing through the quadrature and the little blue LED LFO system here. But they also go to the right here, and this little row of little tiny knobs represents basically a mixer knob. So you got this giant mixer with 25 inputs that I can turn on any note that's coming out of the oscillator with. Now, obviously, in this arpeggio, it's a rather complex signal chain. You've got the quadrature generators turning on these LFOs, in sequences, and your blue independent one going on and off. You got another independent channel of that. Those are being summed together and then into a mixer, and then out. I want to say a word about these two final stage. They're VCAs, but they're very special VCAs. These are I built the legendary Don Buchla low-pass gate. And this circuit is switchable between being a straight VCA or voltage-controlled amplifier that will that will fade the entire channel on and off. Or in low-pass gate mode, the circuit does a wonderful effect where rather than just raising all frequencies at the same time, it simulates what happens when you listen to a sound become more distant and closer. You hear the low frequencies first, and then the high frequencies come in again as the gate opens. And then it fades out the same way. Just sort of the way you would hear a train whistle. You would hear the low frequencies first, and as the train gets closer to you, you hear the high frequencies, and then it goes, and then in reverse as the train goes away from you. It was a really clever implementation of a circuit that Buchla came up with there. But getting back to the chord channel, so I have a 25-channel mixer that we'll show footage of. It's on the back of the panel. And I can select any of the notes that I want to be in the chord at any volume relative to one another. And then this all comes out of a summing amplifier and heads on toward the output. I put what's known as a patch point or an insert point right after the mixer, because you can raise those sliders up and get all sorts of interesting chords, and that's really great for audio research, but it's not very interesting for long periods of time musically. And what I always do with this channel is I insert a pair of filters and or resonators. And so the circuit comes out of the patch point and it gets routed through a wired synthesizer company, Omni Filter, which in my mind is one of the most beautiful full range analog filters that I ever heard, and through a 4-band resonator. Now the difference between a filter and a resonator can get kind of blurry because voltage controlled filters almost always implement resonance. But basically a resonator is a device that emphasizes certain frequencies, and it's kind of like if you shined a flashlight in a totally dark room on a bunch of, let's just say you knocked a rainbow over on the floor and you had a rainbow on the floor, but it's pitch dark, and you took your flashlight and shined across. Well, at the edge of the flashlight's circle of light, the colors are very dim, but in the center they're very bright. And if you sweep that across, you would see the various colors becoming dim and bright in sequence. Well, that's kind of the way a resonator works in terms of sound. You hear certain frequencies emphasized, and then as it passes by, it emphasizes the next higher, next lower frequencies. Then the signals from those two devices are summed back through a mixer and reinserted into the Aurora's signal path, and it goes through one of those low-pass gates, or VCAs, as I demonstrated earlier. So that's a picture of the signal flow as you see it here in this demo. Everything but this little group here is in the bottom device, and these devices are in the wooden box that sits on top. I don't regard them as two separate devices, even though these could be used somewhere else in my rig separately, but I almost never use them for anything but in the Aurora. So in the block diagram, I reference the low-pass gates that are those two gates that are at the last stage before you hear the output. And they are, and they're represented here on the panel by these green LEDs that tell me what they're doing. And what I'm going to do is I can use these knobs to cut out one or the other channels. And now, hang on, I want to check something. So now we are hearing the chord, and I'm going to take this device, all of the lovely wired Omni filter and the resonator, which is right here. I'm going to unplug them momentarily from the signal path, and you can just hear the chord without any of the processing that they're doing. So I'm going to... So what you're hearing now is the chord without any processing. And, you know, it's lovely and all, but obviously, musically, it's not very interesting just by itself. And now I'm going to put them back into the signal chain. I want to make sure I do this properly. And now you can hear the what the resonator and the filter are actually doing to that chord. There are times when they sweep, they are actually turning the chord completely off, and you can't hear anything. But for me, that analogy of the flashlight is pretty powerful, because that's what it sounds like to me. It's as though you were sweeping a flashlight across the notes of the chord to hear them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mess with the bandwidth of the resonator a bit, so you can let more of the chord through and more and less of it. This sometimes gets a little feedbacky and out of control. So that motion that you're hearing are the various bands of the voltage-controlled filter and the 4-band resonator sweeping across the spectrum of a single chord. Now, this sweep will, the bands that the resonator and the filter sweep are fixed, and they will change in reaction to the pitches that are coming through them. So if I change the pitch, and then go to very low tones, or somewhere in the middle. And of course, that's just one component of the sound. And I will bring in the arpeggios to sort of reconstruct the whole picture again. Now, the arpeggio, the rate that it sweeps through is also a voltage controllable parameter. So I can sweep through the arpeggio very fast. And very slow. Now I'm isolating the arpeggio channel for that, and then bring the chord back in the background. Now, so for this demonstration, I've picked notes from the chord that are, I've picked notes and intervals that are diatonically very compatible. Perfect intervals like fifths and fourths. But things can get interesting when you introduce chromatic notes that are not in the chord, so to speak. That aren't, that are in Western musical terms dissonant. And so what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the notes of the chord, and for this I go to the mixer on the back. Okay, we're only hearing the chord channel now. We are going through the resonators and the filters, and I'm going to start killing the notes of the chord. So now I just have one low note going. If I kill that, we're down to silence. So now I'm going to just start bringing up some chromatic notes. Now, let's just listen to that chord without the processing. And if I change the root pitches of it, and now you're hearing it through the resonators. So you can see how just changing the chord can make a huge difference in the sound and throughout the pitch range. That are still playing the same arpeggios that they were when we were listening to the previous chord. But of course, since they're now not playing the same notes that I set up back here, we get a whole nother piece of music. So that pretty much covers the signal flow of this monstrosity. I want to say a little bit about how it's laid out and about some features of the signal chain that I didn't mention before. The sharp-eared audiophiles among you probably noticed that it sounds like there is a little bit of reverb, and it does have onboard reverb. I again resorted to digital electronics for that. I bought some very high quality modules that produce just one type of digital reverb, and it's selectable in the, I can actually select the reverb in and out. I went kind of fancy, and I can put the reverb in pre-VCA or post-VCA, or turn it off entirely. If I had my druthers, I of course love to use analog reverb, but analog reverb means that you have to go inside buildings and take the device and play it inside a large cathedral, or the like the Musikverein in Vienna. And I didn't have the budget to do that, so I had to settle for digital reverb. I didn't talk very much about this section, and that's because this is essentially all of the control voltages. It's a control voltage generator section that lets me control what like the rate that the arpeggios change at, and that opens and closes the gates at varying rates. And these blue knobs remarkably change the open and close the blue channel on the arpeggiator. They're basically just simple, slow, random LFO generation circuits that aren't really all that interesting. But so to close out, I'm basically just going to let the Aurora speak for itself. I'm going to perform a little the way that I tend to perform on it when I use it in improvisations, and let it play itself out.